Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We are glad you could join us this evening for our special presentation on how to help middle school students develop study skills. We are joined this evening by our two expert presenters, Julia Brogan and Jessica Libertor. And also the Director of Guidance for the high school is with us as well. Mr. Aaron Kind is joining us. And we're always grateful when Aaron takes the time to give us some feedback and get a sense of what the baton pass is to high school. So thank you for being here, Aaron. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Julia and Jessica, who are going to lead this presentation. Without further ado, take it away.
All right, let me just share my screen and get everything set up. Everybody.
Okay, so hi, this is Julia Brogan. So I'm one of the learning specialists in middle school. So we figured we'd first start talking about sort of surroundings. Very often parents will ask, is it okay if the kids are in their room, or should they be at the dining room table, or where they should be studying? So ideally, a desk or a table is where you want your child and not lounging. So very often kids will say, I'm really comfortable on my bed or on the couch. It's not necessarily conducive to learning just because it can make you sleepy. So especially if you're studying. So fine if you're reading a book or kind of doing leisure, even just doing some quick flashcards. But other than that, you really want to be at a desk or a table. The other thing is just to avoid distractions. So put your phone on Do Not Disturb or in a separate room. Typically, adolescents do not want their phone away from them, and that's totally understandable. And you kind of have to respect that unless it becomes a distraction to them. But sometimes they will look up something quickly on their phone or text a friend if they're asking a question. So if it's on Do Not Disturb, it's sort of like a nice little balance, and it gives them a little bit more control. Another point is very often kids will like to listen to music. So there's a thing about like noise or no noise. That's really a personal choice. So I know for myself, I need background noise in order for me to concentrate, where someone else in my family needs it to be completely silent. So that's really more of a personal choice. And again, you have to sort of respect the learner and kind of meet them where they are. If you are listening to music, we do suggest that it's more instrumental, or even just put in, I'll teach the kids how to just basically look for like piano, top 100 songs, piano. And then it'll just be more instrumental because it is easier to concentrate when it's not, when you don't have lyrics. But very often kids will just want to listen to a playlist. I do advise, if you're going to listen to music with lyrics, it should be a constant, like a set playlist, because then what will happen is then during a test, if a kid gets nervous, we'll then suggest to them is play back the songs in your head, and that can often trigger sort of like a memory. So, and then another point just about surroundings is have them get up and move around as needed. Get up, take a break, go outside, walk the dog, or even just change settings. So maybe start studying in your room, but then maybe move to the dining room for another subject. This way you kind of like, it reduces fatigue.
For planning, so when planning out projects or just their study time in general, it's a good idea for them to create a calendar or to-do list, a little bit more for the daily goals and a calendar more so for the long-term goals. Also, when planning, to keep in mind that they have other commitments, so sports, activities, friends, time with families, to make sure to plan accordingly. To plan out how much time you want to spend on each subject daily with the goal of having the entire project or assignment completed by the due date. It's also important to keep in mind that things always take longer than you expect them to. So something may always go wrong or an emergency pops up. So to build in a safety net of time, which could be a day or two, so you're not cramming everything in at the last minute. And making sure that their study guide or test review is completed and making sure that their answers are accurate. So they should really be using like extra help time or class time to check in with their teacher and make sure that what they have on their study guide is the correct information. Also, deciding on a break before beginning is really important. This can be based on time intervals of 30 to 40 minutes or by what they've accomplished. So for example, once I'm done with this section, I'll take a break, or once I'm done with 20 problems, I'll take a break. We encourage short breaks. Physical activity is always ideal. So getting up, walking around, and this might also be a good time for them to switch subjects. We also kind of encourage not working up until they're right up until their bedtime. Taking a break before bed and doing something that they enjoy is really important. Staying up late and being tired will affect their attention and performance the next day. So it is better to go to sleep and just wake up earlier the next day to catch up.
So very often parents or even kids will ask sort of, how do you study for a math test? So math, I always talk to the kids and I tell them it's sort of like a sport. You have to practice it and you actually have to do it. So I can sit and watch the X Games and see them flying down the mountain, on snowboards. And I'm like, oh, that looks easy. I could do that. But when you actually try to do it, it is very different. So math is definitely a subject that you actually have to do the work. So things that we suggest are the teachers very often always give a review packet, which will mimic what the test is going to look like. So that's the first thing that they should do is complete the review packet, not just look at it and go, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I know how to do that, but actually complete it. Then the next thing is just maybe study, if it's sort of like a long-term test, is to just sort of break it up into different topics and study a couple of them at a time. They can always go back and review old notes and redo old homework assignments, which is always helpful. Again, they'll say, oh, I did really well on that unit, but some time has passed. So very often you need to go back and redo that. You may have known how to do that back in January, but you may have forgotten all those steps. So it's important to sort of like redo some of those old things. And then there's a lot of different sort of online resources using Khan Academy or the Big Ideas Math, which is associated with our textbook. And they have all these different exams that the students can do. And then it will really then let the kids know, it gives them sort of feedback on what percentage they got correct. And I think that better than for you to say to them, oh, you don't know what you're doing, it's better for the computer to say, you only got 60% of this. And then they can go back and then redo the parts of review their notes or do the sections that they're having trouble with. So those are all different resources, Khan Academy, IXL, Big Ideas Math. But the big thing for math is really they have to do the problems out on paper. Just looking at it and looking at their notes, you're not studying. You're just looking over notes. So that's for math. For all other assessments, so science, English, social studies, foreign language, these are just more like very general subject related suggestions. So again, complete study guide or test review. Very often a teacher will provide that. If they don't provide that, make your own study or review packet. And then again, make sure the answers are accurate. One way to do that, like Mrs. Libator mentioned, is going back to the teacher, either extra help or during class. But even before that, they have all of the answers. It's either in their textbook or in their notes. So they really should be referring to that first before going to their teacher and getting things checked, just because it's another way of sort of like having them another step to studying. Another thing to do is sort of like those old-fashioned flashcards are very handy. There's a reason why they worked is because the act of writing things out does help with memory. And then having someone quiz you, not just necessarily like have them hand the review, but then even just to have a conversation about the topic. So if they're learning something in science, let's pretend it's about the body systems, having your kid talk about it, and then even asking your child sort of questions about like, what do you think they're going to be tested on? What's the format of the test? How are you going to prepare for that? Things like that. If it's an essay test, it's a different way to organize and prepare for that. So the teachers very often will give an outline or a graphic organizer. Many kids want to skip that part, and that's actually the most essential part to writing, is to really plan out and to organize your writing. So that's the first thing that they should do, as well as looking at the writing rubric so that they know how they're going to be graded. So what will the teacher be looking for? What is the essential things in this essay? And then they actually have to practice writing out the essay. So, because that's just sort of a time factor as well. And then figuring out how things go together. So just the act of writing it out is very helpful. And then having somebody else read over their essay and give them feedback. So some resources again are Quizlet, which most parents or all the kids are typically familiar with. Quizlet, especially for vocab related stuff. End of chapter reviews in textbooks, especially social studies and science. They have end of chapter textbook reviews, any class notes, and then teacher created materials in Google Classroom. Because again, you're going to be taking a teacher generated test. So look at the teacher materials because that's where you're going to get most of the questions and answers from.
Some study techniques that we recommend are writing information out. So actually putting pen to paper helps them absorb the material a lot better. Another one is using mnemonic devices. So a popular one that a lot of kids use for math, for example, is PEMDAS, like parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Also creating a test for yourself or taking a practice test, whether it's in the back of their review book or one that they found online. Another one is a lot of repetition. So the more that they repeat the study guide, repeat the problems, or repeat the vocab, the more it's going to sink in for them. Having someone quiz you, this is a great way to get the parents involved in the studying, sitting down and quizzing them. And then finally, making sure that when they're going through the study guide, they're highlighting any information that they don't remember, so they know that they have to go back and maybe study those ones a little bit more. When it comes to projects, some strategies that we recommend are making sure that they look at the grading rubric so they know what is expected of them. Completing an outline or organizer if one is provided. If one is not, making sure that they create their own. It will really help them break up the project into manageable pieces and organize all of their notes. Making sure that they follow the check-in and draft due dates that the teachers have provided. And again, if the teachers don't provide them, making sure that they create their own so that the project is broken up for them. Keep in mind, again, that things always come up, so to build in that safety net of time so they're not cramming things in at the last minute. Making a list of all supplies needed and making sure that they're purchased in advance. Making sure that they keep track of all resources or websites on a separate document because every project requires a citation page. Proofreading any writing and having someone else proofread it as well. And again, making sure that they take advantage of extra help and class time to ask their teacher for questions or even for constructive feedback.
So very often there's just not individual projects. There's also group projects, which usually sort of brings on sort of angst for parents and some kids. But even just thinking myself and Mrs. Liberatore how to work on this presentation together, there are very few jobs in this world where you will be working by yourself. So it is important to learn those skills and to learn how to sort of manage that. So some things that we suggest to kids with group projects, and these are things that are talked about in class as well, is to sort of review the assignment as a group. This way, collectively, everyone knows what's expected of them. And then to kind of come up with a list of questions they might have as a group that they might need to get answered or answered for each other. And then talk about the end results, what their goal is, what it will look like. And they should look at the rubric to find out what the project should look like or what the teacher's expectations are. And then the next step would be to break the project up into manageable sections. Then after that, assign tasks to every group so that everybody knows what they're responsible for, and to always keep in mind that everyone has different strengths. So we should sort of like lean towards those strengths for especially group project. And then they should always have created like a shared document with a plan that has check-in and due dates for themselves. And in addition to that, they should also agree on how and when they're going to communicate outside of class. So is that going to be through a shared doc that they're going to just be looking at, that they agree to look at every day? Are they sending an email? They have a group email going together, or if they have a phone, are they texting each other? And the when is important. So this way kids don't get upset that they reached out to someone at 10 o'clock at night and nobody's responding because everyone should be in bed at 10 o'clock at night. So just sort of have those like parameters are important. And then at different points, they should discuss the progress being made by everyone. Take advantage of class time, because when there are group projects, there is class time devoted to that. So they should take advantage of class time or extra help to ask for teacher feedback. And the big thing is the fact that there will be hiccups in regards to group dynamics, and they should kind of figure it out themselves. And if they can't, that's what the teacher's there for. They really should then reach out to the teacher, but not the day before it's due or the morning of, to all of a sudden say that, you know, this student in my group hasn't contributed anything. So it's really about sort of keeping the teacher aware of if there are problems and coming up with solutions to those problems. The next thing is, we thought it would be helpful just to sort of have a couple of slides on just sort of what can parents do to help. So this is kind of, all the other ones were just sort of about study strategies. The big thing is when there are assignments, and the great thing now with middle school is the fact that we do have a homework roster. So you're always, as a parent, in the know of when big projects are due, and they're typically at the top of the homework roster under assignments or projects or long-term projects. And I would ask your child to explain to you the project and the rubric, and just have them in their own words explain to you what it is. And then you can always go back and look to see if, if there's any holes that need to be kind of filled in. The next thing is have your child share their plan on how to get it done. Don't jump in and tell them how you think it should be done. Let them come up with the plan, and then see how they do with that for a while, and then ask them if they need any help, or say, how is that going? Do you think you need to change any of that? So kind of keep them to the plan. And it's okay if they change their plan as they go along. You want them to change it, especially if they realize it's not working for them. Also create a shared calendar or to-do lists that manage their time among keeping all their subjects and other commitments. Like we mentioned earlier, very often kids are involved in different sports and things like that, but you might know they may know their own schedule, but very often they don't realize the family schedule. So all of a sudden you have to show up to your brother's game, or your sister's recital or something like that, or grandma's coming in town. And that will cause a lot of sort of angst for kids where I was planning on doing whatever the assignment was tonight, and now you ruined it for me. So if you can kind of keep them sort of, if you have a shared calendar as a family, even if it's online, of big events that they're going to be part of, would be very helpful. Also monitor your child to ensure that they're actually on task. Don't stick your head in and say, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Or don't try to catch them, when they're watching YouTube videos. Go in with a snack. Do you know what I mean? This way you can kind of linger, bring the laundry, things like that, and just ask and say, oh, how are things going? Do you need, and if they're off task, just say to them, do you need a break? Because if they're off task and they're watching or doing something else, it's basically because they need a break. So then give them a more appropriate, say, why don't you go take the dog for a walk or something like that? Or why don't you go outside and play basketball for a little while? So another thing is to sort of encourage those short breaks. Very often the kids will kind of get stuck and be very unproductive for long periods of time. So your best bet is to sort of like break that cycle for them and say, why don't you go outside, go for a walk, do this, do that, make it seem like they're helping you somehow, and it'll encourage them to get up and moving around. Other suggestions is provide healthy snacks, water, and encouraging words. Instead of going in and going, I can't believe you're not done yet, things like that. Just like, oh, you're working so hard, I'm so proud of you, all of those types of things. And again, bring in the snacks. Food is always welcome, especially with adolescents. And it's a great way to get into their space without invading their space, because they'll welcome you there. Phones can be a tool, but also distraction. So encourage, as we said before, put on the do not disturb mode. Set an alarm for breaks. So if they are going to go out for play basketball or jump in the trampoline, say, why don't you set yourself alarm for 20 minutes or something like that, just to kind of, this way they have an idea to get back. And then also too, they can reach out to friends. It's okay if they're texting their friends, because they might be asking them for things. For yourself as well, during your day, I'm sure you're reaching out, you're sometimes needing that social connection. So ask to see your child's work or quiz them on material, refrain from focusing on what they haven't done. Instead, say things like, I see you're a little bit more behind than you planned. What can I do to help? Or just ask them about the topic that they're going over. Also, make sure your child sticks to their usual bedtime. Sleep is essential to learning, focus, and memory. And as a parent, that's kind of like your big role, is to make sure that they get to bed on time. And they will fight you on it because they'll feel like, I'm not done with this, I need more time. But you do need to set a boundary for them. And again, say to them, I understand that, but sleep is important. I can wake you up a half hour early tomorrow and you can work on it then. And then also the big thing is, keep in mind, just because something works for you doesn't mean it's right for me. So I have 3 kids. Each one of my kids are very, very different learners, and things that work for me do not necessarily work for them. And then all of my students as well, we approach them very differently based on their needs and their learning style. So don't push things. You can introduce things and share things with them. And some of those, techniques or strategies will work for them, but it's really important for them to figure out what works best for them.
So in creating this presentation, Julia and I did share the strategies and techniques with the students, and this was just some of their direct feedback that they gave us, and we thought it was important to share with you guys. So the first one was that sometimes time limits can add pressure. We would rather choose to end at a certain point in the chapter or project without a definitive time put on it. Another one that they mentioned was that sometimes we need our parents to just chill out and let us own the work. This is an opportunity for us to be independent. Some of us prefer the paper and pencil materials rather than online resources as they can be distracting. When working with groups, parents should avoid getting involved in the group dynamics. If needed, we can ask our teacher. Very often, parents are trying to help, but can end up stressing us out more. And finally, they said, please trust that we know what works for us and what doesn't.
And the last just sort of general thing is just sort of just general study tips. So again, find a quiet place, avoid distractions if you can, silence the phone, plan out their time. Again, this is, I think, the hardest part for most kids and adults is sort of managing your time and being productive in that time. So I think you sort of have to help them with that and structure that for them a little bit. And then handwriting notes, like we said before, by writing things out, you remember them. The kids are and we're often too, very often we're typing everything, but there is something about writing things out. I write a grocery list, I never look at it, but because I wrote it, I remember what was on it. So it's those types of things, and share those things with your kids. Just say, I write these things down. I never look at my to-do list because I wrote it down. And then kind of say how important those things are. Again, take short breaks. Very often, like I mentioned before, you do need to monitor your kids and recognize when to take a break. And then the last thing again is get a good night's sleep. Do not overwork. Make sure that they're getting enough sleep. They're going to bed at a reasonable time. And because it is hard for them, especially if certain kids, like they just want to, I want to study a little bit more. If you give them that opportunity, say the next morning, it will be able, we still know they'll have another chance. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that was helpful. But again, like we mentioned before, it's really, I think it's just every kid trying to figure out for themselves what works for them. And then just you as parents and as teachers, just sort of guiding them and giving them different strategies.
Julia and Jessica, and also Jelana, who couldn't join us tonight, our third special education teacher full-time in the middle school. Thank all three of you for your input and for your guidance through this presentation on study skills. Greatly appreciated. There are a lot of questions, many of which are not written yet. Please feel free to generate questions for us to answer. Aaron, thank you for helping with some of those questions already. But the first one that I think we can answer here is that this presentation is being recorded. So many of you I know must have been coming in from sporting events and whatever else. We've doubled the number since 7 o'clock. So please do know that we are recording this, and it will be available so that you can repeat parts of it if you so choose. That's being done. Another teacher has joined us, I believe. I think I saw Vanessa Lawson has joined us. Vanessa is one of our 8th grade English teachers. And Vanessa, if you would like to jump in and say anything, please feel free to, as it pertains to grade 8 English or just your views as a parent, etc. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. I just think they did a fabulous job, and I would just double down on everything that Ms. Brogan and Ms. Liberator just said. Amazing. I echo their sentiments about how best to prepare for English, and encourage all parents to encourage their students
I think your connection is really wonky.
The teachers, if we can be in any way helpful.
Vanessa, I think your connection is a little choppy.
Especially as they're in middle
sorry.
school and have as such, has a you or yet you're.
Um, Allison has asked, are there writing tutors in the high school? In your opinions, I'm going to add an S to that. In your opinions, what are the best ways to work on essays and writing skills? Aaron, please consider yourself part of that questioning as well.
Sure, I'll start. Are there writing tutors in the high school? There's no writing tutors in the sense of like, I can go to somebody that's not my teacher. I mean, there's obviously English teachers and history teachers that can help with writing. And I think, you know, I'll love to hear what Julie and Jessica have to say, but I think the best way to work on your writing is to write. And for that matter, also to read. So the New York Times, The Economist, you know, whatever publications are around your house, and obviously any just fiction or nonfiction is going to help with somebody's writing skills. In the high school, there's a lot of workshopping. So like rough draft, comments, revisions before a final paper is due. And I think a lot of the growth in a writer in the high school comes just within the classroom. And there's writing across all disciplines, maybe with the exception of a little bit of math, but in science, they're writing lab reports. In history, they're obviously writing papers. In English, they're writing papers. In world language class, they're obviously writing in a different language, but there's writing there. So there's opportunities for growth and development with these skills across all disciplines when a student gets to high school.
Yeah, I would second that. I think the biggest thing with I would say with anything with writing is the fact that the more you read, the better writer you become. And I think also then just trying to find a style of writing and then even just sort of like to emulate other writers is very often what people will do, is sort of find a style that they're comfortable with. It's sort of like if you think of just artwork, you know, sometimes people model after certain artists and kind of just pick up some of those craft moves. So I think that's always important. But again, the only way to improve writing is by writing, which if a middle schooler, that's a really tough task. Kids do have a tendency as they mature and get a little bit older that they do sort of want to share their voice a little bit more, especially in writing. So they will stay with a task a little bit longer. Where middle school, they want to write it once and they don't even want to look over it. And then they just want to submit it immediately and have hands off. So some of it is just maturity in regards to sort of like writing.
I also did want to add in that we mentioned Khan Academy as a resource for math, but they do also have grammar activities that kids can use. That's also a really great tool.
One of the most important stages of writing really comes in the redrafting and editing phase, when you've got to actually take what you've written and read it out loud to someone. Does it really make sense? Does it convey what you wanted it to convey? Have you really answered the question that was being asked? Unfortunately, for some kids, they love to share extemporaneously whatever is flowing through their minds at the moment, whether or not it is related to the question being asked. And they may be very, very skilled writers, but they've got to stick to the topic. And it's an essential piece to be able to have an audience for your writing. And knowing who the best person in the house is for that task is really important. If you find yourself saying, that's the wrong article, it's an not an and, or what have you, they're not going to freely talk that through with you as quickly as maybe someone else in the house. It doesn't mean that everything is great and it's lovely, but there's a difference between being an audience and being an editor. I know for some families, and we've had families where editing has been both parents living. it's very hard to step back and recognize the developmental stage that your child is in as a writer, but it can really help them to be able to say, can you stop for a second? Can you read that sentence again? Because I'm not sure I understood it. And see if your child can take the cue and say, oh, no, I'm missing something here. It's a skill to develop for you as well, to be an audience member without being necessarily a hard editor or a critic. And that's a really beneficial thing to be able to do with your child. And it will pay dividends in the future if you can cultivate that that role with them, because they'll just come and say, can you listen to this? And you'll be in heaven because you have had a track record of being, proving that you can be supportive and helpful without instructing or changing things, because that can be the hardest thing of all. I'm not very good at that, by the way. I'm not sitting here as an expert. I always want to get in there and fix things, and that's not what they need. So breathe and decide in your house who's best for this. Sometimes it's an older sibling who is best at it, but cultivate that if you can. A question that was asked earlier was, will there be any after-school extra help programs? And if so, how often do they meet? Our after-school program, the Bronxville after-school program, does support after-school homework helps in the school, in middle school. This is a program that is run by one of our middle school counselors, Miss Lisa DeSanto, and she organizes a group of invested high school students who come to work with our kids, as the name would suggest, on homework. But homework can include studying. Homework can include preparing for projects. And they generally meet twice a week, but every semester the offering is slightly different. They meet in the library after school, and it's long-standing and very successful if that's of interest to you. Another question that came up was, do the teachers provide guidance specifically on what students should review for final exams? And I'm happy to let Julia or Jessica take that one, because they are in constant contact with the teachers specifically. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So each individual teacher will provide sort of either an outline of what what your final is going to look like, or sort of review packet. So for instance, for math, they would give all the topics and then also in addition, give a review packet. And then if it's an English class, if it's like an essay, they would kind of give the essay prompt, provide all the organizers, things like that. Social studies this year in particular, they're doing projects, so which have been going on for the past couple of weeks. And all of that's outlined for them with, individual due dates and things like that, and check-ins. And the same thing with science. They're also doing group projects as well. So the teachers are always providing it. The kids it's never like, oh, wow, good luck. The teachers want the kids to do well. So they'll provide them with that guidance. It's really then what do the kids do after that? So just having the review packet or knowing the topics, that's just you being in the know. And now it's, what are you going to do about that? So are you going to then be an active learner and study?
Thanks, Julia. Another question that was asked earlier was, are these study skills something that is covered at school with students directly? And I answered that question, but I'd be very interested for our two teachers here to talk a little bit about the evolution of those skills across time, because they don't even really start in middle school.
Yeah, I mean, the skills that we specifically discussed tonight, this whole presentation was shared with the students in advisory classes. So they have had their eyes on this. They gave us feedback on it, but these skills are constantly addressed, I would say, in the middle school throughout all subjects.
And different skills at different times, depending on what makes sense. Aaron, a question about the extra help structure in the high school.
Yeah, I was about to put it in the chat. Yes, most definitely. So early morning extra help, 7:45 to 8:25, Monday through Friday. Every teacher's in their classroom with an open door, and students can come and go as they please. COVID aside, if you will. But we do have extra help in the high school every morning. Yes.
Before I answer the next question, I just want to put in a pitch for music. As somebody who grew up in a household where studying meant buckling down and dead quiet and pin drop and not a word, it wasn't until college that I was able to recognize that actually music made a huge difference for me in studying. And I thought it was all music. Any music would be fine. And I learned slowly that no, it was only music I was deeply familiar with. It was only music that I knew super well. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't random music because I didn't know all the songs the same way. It was things that were playing in my head anyway. Yeah, Elvis and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and things like that, things that are already playing in my head, keeps some part of my focus occupied so I can do the work. That's not the case. If I was, I would be another one of Julia's kids who would have a whole nother MO with what worked for me. I'm not suggesting that's going to work for everyone by any stretch, but do be aware that what works for you isn't necessarily going to be the best strategy for your child. Even if it irritates you, give it a try. See if it does help. Where can we find a schedule of all the final exams? I've been putting that out every week in the parent bulletin for the last 3 weeks, or almost, I think, month. It is included every Friday. If you're not getting it, please feel free to email me and I'll shoot it right out to you. The final exam schedule runs from the 21st of June through the 24th. For 6th grade students, they don't have final exams, but they have final days of work through the 25th. The last day is kind of a party, but and that's okay. There's always got to be a last day somewhere. So the schedule is set, including long-term presentations for social studies in grades 7 and 8, the final examinations in English and mathematics in grades 7 and 8 as well. General question, next year, will the school library be open for studying in the mornings during the extra help time, or after school, or during free periods? That answer is different. I'm going to let Aaron talk about what the high school might do first, and then I'll fill in the middle school.
Yeah, I mean, in the high school, definitely the library is open. This is kind of, we're putting COVID to the side if that's even possible, but in a sort of normal world, the library is open. I don't know if it's open in the morning before school starts, but definitely at 8:30, the library is open and there's space to study throughout the day. I do believe it closes at maybe 3 or 3:30, but the library is open for students to come into, for the high school students at least.
And the middle school is different. We don't have free periods, and we don't open the library for students to use unattended, so to speak. So during extra help, which we would be very happy if kids came to extra help, that's where they should be, in a situation where there is a teacher present. After school, the library is open for a while for students to take out books, And we are anticipating a kind of a relaxed COVID-free existence, we hope. But at lunchtime, students can go to the library if they get a pass from Mr. Santo in the cafeteria. And a certain number of middle school students are allowed to go up to the library. They can play games. They don't have to be pin drop quiet or study. There are other things they can do in the library which are fun. But if they want to, they can use the library for that purpose as well. How many kids? Like 20. So there are very few days where she gives out all the passes, but most of them can get there if they want. So have to mention we had good luck with high school students helping tutor in middle school as another resource. That is a very valuable resource to consider. And it's a program that predates all of us, I think. We are happy to continue to cultivate that relationship between the high school and the middle school. And there is actually a list of approved tutors in the high school guidance office that is generated each year for parents who are interested in having someone sit with their child to do work. Because let's face it, there are also relationships in houses where sometimes you need to have another perspective, and you need to have somebody who isn't in the nest to weigh in on things. The most famous example of this is, think about who taught you to drive. How do you get along with that person when they were teaching you to drive? It's a hard thing to be everything to your child. And there are parents who can recognize that, listen, I'm a mathematician. I'm not going to be able to do this because the simple mistakes are making, that's a perfect idea. Use a student tutor if you'd like. Jeannie is absolutely right. They do a very good job. And in fact, we know of some kids who continue with their tutors into high school, even though the kids are in college. It's really neat. And it's another testament to the chain, the links in this chain that exist in our school. Folks, I'm not going to keep you any longer than we have to. From Jessica, Julia, Aaron, or Vanessa, any final thoughts before we sign off for tonight?
I would just add, first off, Julia and Jessica, you did a great job. And we do a very, 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 very similar presentation to the ninth graders when they get to us, sort of eerily similar. I would just add for the parents, we talk a lot about in high school about sort of like project managing. So to Tom's point and Julia and Jessica's point, it's not like, so what do you need to do? How are you going to do it? Let's get started. You know, turn your phone off. You're not walking in sort of adding to potentially whatever internal pressure that they have. It's really like, how are you going to go about starting that? When do you think's a good time to do that? Do you need anything? Can I get you right? And so you're allowing the student to have just more agency and more independence, but also letting them know that you're there for them. And potentially also just like not transferring any of your own agita, if you will, onto their sort of learning experience. Because I think we could all, with kids, agree that like when you're getting worked up and you're kind of like trying to get them to do something, they get very worked up. And so that is not the sort of state of being that we want a student to be in as they sit down to study for a test that they feel like is very important. And so I think just sort of trying to check some of that before you sit down and start to talk to your child about, you know, whatever the final is or the project or the test or essay, and then just sort of trying to do more of a hands-off but supportive approach is also just, I guess, one thing that I, you know, sort of echo, but also just reinforce as well.
Aaron, thank you. And that made me think of something else that I would put in as a harbinger of what can happen when studying goes wrong. And that is when a child sits for hours at a desk and does nothing. The amount of energy and psychically, physically, emotionally is just as great sitting there doing nothing as if you did the work. Your child can be exhausted from sitting and procrastinating. It can be very helpful if you see that back to Julia's point, the power of snacks. Another good idea to bring in something. Oh, here's a cold drink. Hey, are you still working on that vocabulary in your head? Put it down, get up. If it's not happening, it's not going to happen because you are being heavy-handed. Help your child get out of that state of consciousness, do something else. But I've got to study. I know you do, but I really want to see you practice your basketball, whatever it is. Do something other than studying, even if it's, take 15 minutes, do your phone, do whatever you're going to do. I'll let you know when 15 minutes are up, and then we're going to try again. It's very important because procrastination takes a heck of a lot of work, and it's just fruitless labor. The labor is still there. So if you can kind of monitor and see, is this really happening right now or not? It can be very helpful. Sometimes kids just need to blow off some energy before they sit down to do something. Other kids can't do anything until they do the work. It really depends on your child. Jessica and Julia, any final thoughts before we sign off?
That's it. I think, like we said before, just sort of, take your kids where they're at and just sort of help guide them to the next step. So,
Yeah, just remember
you.
everybody learns a little differently, and thank you for everything that you guys are doing at home with them.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. And again, this will be in the bulletin this week for you if you missed any part of it. Thank you, and have a good evening.